Everyone talks about the 60s like it was all John Wayne and the Dollars trilogy, but dig a little deeper and you'll find banned films, butchered masterpieces, and buried careers. A Western where the hero dies and the villains win. Brando's directorial debut, hijacked and nearly butchered by the studio. James Stewart and Henry Fonda playing against type so hard, audiences walked out. These aren't the usual suspects. These are the 15 Westerns from the 1960s that actually matter. This one had everything. Lee Marvin, Burt Lancaster, Woody Strode, directed by Richard Brooks, nominated for 3 Oscars, and yet it still ended up buried in the shadow of the good, the bad, and the ugly. The marketing just couldn't keep up with Sergio Leone. The setup's classic tough guy territory. A cocky millionaire in Texas hires 4 hardened adventurers to rescue his kidnapped wife from a Mexican bandit. That's the premise, but it's the execution that makes this one worth digging up. It leans hard on the whole assemble the team formula. Think the Magnificent Seven, the Dirty Dozen, Navarone, that whole era of men on a mission movies. The violence is rough. The cast is stacked with charisma. Lee Marvin somehow doesn't steal the whole show, Robert Ryan barely breaks a sweat, and Woody Strode makes a serious impression without saying much at all. Then you've got Lancaster and Jack Palance chewing the scenery like it's a steak dinner. It's loaded with classic tough guy banter, and the pacing still holds up decades later. Roger Ebert once said this was the best directed Hollywood film of the time, and Brooks indeed handles it all with a steady hand, even through a shoot plagued by everything from flash floods to desert heat. This is one of the last great classical Hollywood westerns made just before everything changed. The Marvin-Lancaster dynamic alone is worth it. Now here's one the studio buried as fast as it could. Firecreek had James Stewart and Henry Fonda, 2 of the biggest names in the genre, but both of them playing way against type. Stewart is a small-town part-time sheriff who doesn't want trouble. Fonda plays a stone-cold killer leading a gang of outlaws, and that alone was enough to piss off audiences. The film's slow, grim, and mean, and it's all the better for it. Fonda's crew is a nasty bunch. Jack Elam, Morgan Woodward, Gary Lockwood, James Best. Just a rogues gallery of drunks and killers hiding out in this tiny nowhere town while dodging a posse. Stewart's more of a constable than a sheriff, a guy who mostly breaks up Saturday night bar fights and deals with livestock complaints. He's got a pregnant wife, a quiet life, and no interest in getting involved. But as the gang starts acting out, he's forced to pick a side. The whole thing builds to a final standoff that's clearly lifted from High Noon, but it works. It's well shot, tightly choreographed, and bleak in all the right ways. Critics didn't get it at the time. Audiences hated seeing their all-American heroes broken and bitter. But in hindsight, this is one of the best psychological westerns of the decade. This one comes out of France, believe it or not. Cemetery Without Crosses was written, directed by, and stars Robert Hossein, and it's the only western he ever made. It's a French-Italian production with some ties to Sergio Leone, who supposedly directed one scene, and Dario Argento even got a screenwriting credit, so it's got a weird pedigree right out of the gate. Hossein plays Manuel, a loner who lives in a crumbling ghost town. His old flame shows up after her husband gets murdered by a local land baron and his family. She wants revenge. He agrees. That kicks off a brutal story that ends with pretty much nobody left standing. The film does a few things differently. For one, there's barely any dialogue. Whole scenes play out in silence, just looks and movement. It slows the pacing down, but it works. Gives it more of an art house tone without drifting into pretentious territory. And visually, it's impressive. Shot in Almeria, Spain. Same place as half the spaghetti westerns of the time. But it makes the most of the location. Stark mountain backdrops. A worn-out ghost town that looks completely lived in. This was supposed to be a Stanley Kubrick movie. Instead, it turned into Marlon Brando's only directorial credit and nearly sank his career. One-Eyed Jacks went off the rails before it even started shooting. Kubrick dropped out 2 weeks before production. Sam Peckinpah was fired after 3 weeks of writing with Brando, and Brando rewrote the script himself mid-shoot. Filming dragged on for 6 months. Editing took a year. In the end, the studio took the final cut away from Brando and released their own version. Critics didn't like it. Brando hated it. Peckinpah disowned it. But somehow, it's still standing today. Scorsese called it visually stunning and pushed for a 4K restoration through his Film Foundation. He helped get it into Cannes and the New York Film Festival in 2016. Tarantino named it one of his 3 favorite westerns of all time. The story's basic. Brando plays a betrayed outlaw who comes back for revenge, but it's got this slow burn, emotional weight that sets it apart from the usual revenge plots. Box office was decent, about $6 million, but the behind-the-scenes disaster made sure Brando never directed again. This is one of Sergio Corbucci's lesser-known films. It's not as flashy as Django, not as extreme as The Great Silence, but The Hellbenders might be his most cynical. Joseph Cotten plays a former Confederate colonel dragging a fake funeral procession across the country. Hidden inside the coffin, stolen Union money. The plan is to use the cash to rebuild the Confederacy and restart the war. He's traveling with his 3 sons and a woman pretending to be the dead man's widow. Every stop along the way turns into another disaster. Robbery, betrayal, bloodshed. And Corbucci doesn't bother with good guys. There aren't any. As Tarantino put it, the Hellbenders doesn't have anybody to root for at all. There's bad guys and victims, and that's it. The film never got a proper US release. The dubbing was sloppy, distribution was weak, and it slipped through the cracks. Even among spaghetti western fans, it doesn't come up much. But Tarantino dug it enough to include it in his first film fest back in '96, so it's got its place. Just don't go in expecting heroes. Sergio Corbucci again. Only this time, he drops the desert heat and goes straight into the snow-covered wasteland of Snow Hill, Utah. The Great Silence is bleak, angry, and unrelentingly cold in every sense. Fox bought it for US distribution and then shelved it for years, wouldn't release it. They didn't want anything to do with the ending because here, the bad guys win. Everyone else dies. Jean-Louis Trintignant plays Silence, a mute gunman with a slit throat and a score to settle. He only kills in self-defense, but he's not shy about provoking someone until they draw first. Klaus Kinski plays Loco, one of the most vicious bounty hunters in any Italian Western. As Tarantino put it, I'm not a big fan of Kinski, but he's amazing in this movie. It's definitely his best performance in a genre movie. Shot in the Italian Dolomites, the film's visuals are unreal. Thick snow, dead trees, abandoned towns, it all feels lifeless. Ennio Morricone's score is one of his most haunting, and it was reportedly his personal favorite. Darryl F. Zanuck, co-founder of 20th Century Fox, hated the film's tone so much he blocked the US release. It stayed buried until the 2000s. Another Corbucci Western, but this one's a bit more chaotic. Beyond the Law was shot back-to-back with The Great Silence, and it shows. The script changed constantly on set. A lot of it feels half-improvised, but it's got Lee Van Cleef, and that alone carries weight. Van Cleef plays Cudlip, a drifter who teams up with 2 partners to rob a silver shipment. They use trickery more than violence, at least at first. The plot's full of double crosses, and Van Cleef gives one of his more layered performances. He's still got that villainous edge, but the character's more complex than usual, and the supporting cast is solid, especially Gordon Mitchell as the main heavy, just the kind of guy who looks menacing standing still. The marketing was a mess, the release barely happened, and now it mostly lives in forgotten DVD box sets. Still, for fans of the genre, it holds up surprisingly well. Corbucci again, and this one's completely different. The Mercenary is loud, violent, and proud of it. Franco Nero plays a Polish gun-for-hire named Sergej Kowalski, hired to help a miner and a peasant girl lead a revolution in Mexico. The whole thing is a chaotic blend of gunfights, betrayal, and clown outfits. There's a shootout in a bull ring during a parade, with one of the leads dressed as Jesus. And yes, it ends with a clown versus gunslinger showdown in front of a packed arena. It sounds ridiculous, but somehow Corbucci makes it work. Critics ignored this one for years, but Corbucci considered it his best film, and Tarantino loved the movie so much, he even borrowed its shootout structure for his own Django Unchained. This was John Ford doing something he didn't usually do, telling a story with a black lead. tackling racism, military justice, and sexual assault accusations head-on. The film stars Woody Strode as a Buffalo Soldier court-martialed for allegedly assaulting and murdering a white woman and killing her father, his commanding officer. Ford had a history of racial stereotypes in earlier films, especially with black characters, so Sergeant Rutledge and later Cheyenne Autumn were his attempts to address that. Of the two, Rutledge is tighter, darker, and more direct. The courtroom drama structure works well. Jeffrey Hunter handles the legal side of things, but it's Woody Strode who holds the screen. His scenes, especially in the courtroom and later when he rides back to help his men, stand out. The studio dumped the film. It didn't perform, critics ignored it, and it vanished. But over time, it's gained respect. Even Ford himself considered it one of the most important movies he ever made. Not a western by guns, but by spirit. Australian sheep-herding epic by Fred Zinnemann, starring Robert Mitchum and Deborah Kerr. It was a critical success, nominated for 5 Oscars, but it got buried under the American Western wave of the time. The film follows a nomadic family in early 20th century Australia. Mitchum, Kerr, and their son living out of a wagon. The mother and son want to settle down. Mitchum doesn't. That's the entire tension. Zinnemann insisted on filming in Australia, even though Jack Warner wanted to shoot it in Arizona. Zinnemann spent 12 weeks just shooting scenery and sheep herding before the cast even showed up. Once they arrived, the weather went from scorching heat to freezing rain, dragging the shoot out by weeks. Mitchum hated the sheep and ended up moving onto a boat just to escape fans. Deborah Kerr later called it her favorite performance, though she lost her 6th Oscar nomination. 6 times nominated, 6 times passed over. The film is slow, not much action, but the performances, music, and direction hold it together. It's not a must-see for everyone, but for anyone interested in frontier stories outside of America, it's worth the time. This was Sam Peckinpah's 2nd film, and the one that should have made his name right away. The cast is stacked with legends. Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea, 2 aging icons, play 2 old-timers trying to survive one last gold transport job. Scott retired after seeing the finished film, said he couldn't top it and didn't want to try. McCrea also bowed out not long after. Edgar Buchanan, Warren Oates, great supporting cast. It's about 2 men past their prime, one trying to stay honest, the other not so much. The ending lands hard. Peckinpah once said, "The end of a picture is always an end of a life." That quote fits this movie like a glove. Peckinpah made this for just over $800,000. The studio marketed it poorly, paired it with sex comedies and low-budget imports on double bills. But once people realized this was the movie audiences were actually staying for, not the so-called main feature, MGM quietly gave it a better rollout. And according to one of the actors, it became a classic Western that has always remained in circulation. People think the world of it. Kirk Douglas did a lot of iconic films, Paths of Glory, Ace in the Hole, Out of the Past. But out of all of them, the one he called his favorite was Lonely Are the Brave. It's a modern Western about a cowboy named Jack Burns who refuses to adapt to the modern world. A man out of time, basically. Universal hated it, gave it next to no promotion, released it the same week as Lawrence of Arabia, which buried it completely. It bombed at the box office. Douglas got a BAFTA nomination, but that didn't help much. The studio didn't even want to keep the title. Douglas wanted to call it The Last Cowboy, but the execs ran it through some computer program and came up with Lonely Are the Brave instead. He never stopped being bitter about that. Douglas said it was the only film that really reflected who he was, and over time, it's become a cult classic for people who like their westerns quieter, more thoughtful, and completely disillusioned with modern life. This one came out right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and it was about as anti-war as you could get. James Stewart plays a Virginia farmer during the Civil War who wants nothing to do with either side. He's neutral, stubborn, doesn't believe in slavery, doesn't want to fight for the Confederacy. But then his youngest son gets taken by Union soldiers, and he's dragged into the war whether he likes it or not. Stewart was actually a Vietnam hawk in real life, so him starring in this made things a little complicated politically. Universal barely promoted it, They thought it was too soft, but it quietly made money, and Stewart's performance is one of his best. The film was directed by Andrew McLaglen, a TV guy mostly, and yeah, it's a little slow, but the story is solid and Stewart brings real weight to it. No big heroics, no easy answers, just a guy trying to protect his family in a war that keeps pushing in on him. Paul Newman plays a white man raised by Apaches who ends up being treated like dirt by white society. It's based on an Elmore Leonard novel and directed by Martin Ritt, who Newman had worked with before. Critics didn't love it at the time. Some thought the social commentary was too aggressive. The box office was lukewarm, but looking back, this is one of Newman's greatest performances. The setup's simple. Newman's character is riding a stagecoach with a bunch of passengers who look down on him until they need him. And the cast of characters is textbook Western: the corrupt Indian agent, the desperado, the lady with a past, and of course the kid. There's always a kid. Roger Ebert liked this one a lot. Said the dialogue had real grace to it, and pointed out 3 standout performances: Diane Cilento, Richard Boone, and Martin Balsam. Steve McQueen was offered the lead, but turned it down. Later said it was one of Newman's best roles. Another take on the OK Corral story, only this time it skips the actual gunfight and focuses on everything after: the trials, the fallout, the manhunt. Directed by John Sturges, with James Garner as Wyatt Earp and Jason Robards as Doc Holliday. Garner's performance is one of his best: stoic, principled, very different from how Earp is usually portrayed. Robards brings a darker, more cynical edge to Holliday. Together, they're a solid pair. The film claims to be the way it happened, and while that's a stretch, it's definitely more grounded than most versions. Critics wanted more action. They thought it was too procedural, too dry. It flopped hard at the box office. By '67, audiences were starting to lose interest in serious westerns. The parodies were taking over. Support your local sheriff, Butch Cassidy, that kind of thing. It never really got its due. But if you want a grounded, post-OK Corral western that takes its subject seriously, this one's worth a look.